Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Sean DeLynn. It is June 3rd, 2020, and we have a special edition of Mormon Stories Podcast for you today. Sadly, happily, I don't know exactly how to describe it. We are here to showcase yet another Mormon family who has been excommunicated from the Mormon Church. The guests that we have on today are Sam and Sara Pinson. Hi, Sam and Sara. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
And we also have two of their children. We have Olivia and Sam Jr. Pinson. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
And some may take issue with the fact that I'm actually using the word excommunication because, as we've covered on Mormon Stories Podcast, in the past 6 months or so, the LDS Church, or the Mormon Church, made a new announcement that they were going to stop calling these disciplinary councils excommunications, and instead they were going to call them removal of membership meetings or something to that effect. And so, but if it looks like a duck and it smells like a duck, it's probably a duck. I personally am taking these announcements as euphemisms. In other words, the church is just trying to use flowery positive names to describe something that really hasn't changed. And what happened was a few days ago, Sam Pinson was excommunicated from the Mormon Church in Ammon, Idaho, which is near Idaho Falls. And it was for, as I understand it, just some posts on Facebook that talk about the factual history of the church and some of the problems with the Mormon Church. So it was for apostasy. It was for just open and free expression of opinions or concerns or feelings or problematic history. And, it's a tragedy whenever the Mormon Church excommunicates people. I've been excommunicated, many of my dear friends have as well, for apostasy. And this is extra interesting because Sam served as a bishop in Ammon, Idaho for 4.5 years, up until as recently as 2018. So 2 years ago, Sam was bishop of his Ammon, Idaho ward. And fast forward 2 years, and he and his family, I'll say his family, because when you excommunicate a parent, you usually excommunicate the whole family. That's how it works out. So don't get me wrong, only Sam had the disciplinary council and only his membership records were removed. But really, in effect, they've excommunicated the whole family. And we'll be talking about that today as well. So that's what we're here to talk about. We've got 4 members of this wonderful family. They woke up super early this morning in Idaho Falls and drove here to Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're just really thrilled, Sam and Sara, to have you guys on Mormon Stories Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it's not the most fun sort of conditions, but we really appreciate your courage and your willingness to share your stories because, as we've always believed on Mormon Stories Podcast, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and the church is trying to make progress in this area, but clearly they have a ways to go. So thanks for being willing to stand up and tell your story.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
These stories are very helpful.
And I also just want to thank Sam Jr. and Olivia as well. It's really awesome that you guys are here because the youth voice is really important.
Awesome to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Sam and Sara, let's begin. You guys, let's start where we always kind of start, which is with your kind of Mormon background. This is kind of the Mormon cred portion of the interview, but let's just talk about both of your Mormon upbringings. And Sam, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay. I grew up in the church. My parents were both active, and they taught me the gospel. I went to primary.
Where were you raised?
I was born in Oklahoma, but moved to Southern California when I was about 4. So Southern California is
Orange
where
County?
I grew up. The San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
Granada Hills.
Okay.
So I attended.
How many siblings?
Oh, sorry. A little bit more about my family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are 8 kids in the family.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, big family.
Okay.
I'm the third oldest, and we were all in as a family together. Went to every sacrament meeting. Didn't think of General Conference as a weekend off. Attended in the stake center, wearing our Sunday clothing. wore Sunday clothing all day on Sundays. I believed. I don't remember a moment when yesterday I didn't believe and then the next day I did believe. It was the growing light, growing certainty, that kind of experience for me.
Was your mom a stay-at-home mom?
Yes.
And
yes.
what was your dad's profession?
Software developer.
Oh.
Yeah.
With software we would know, or?
Quite a bit of it was, he was self-employed, and so it was proprietary stuff just for his clients. But he worked for IBM for a while.
Global Services?
You don't
know.
I wouldn't
Okay,
even
that's
know.
fine.
Yeah,
That's
that was
Long time ago. Okay.
My father was a seminary teacher. That was kind of early morning seminary teacher. That was kind of his lifelong calling in church. I don't want to say the wrong number, but I think it was at least 25 years he taught early morning seminary. So I had my father as my seminary teacher. I loved that experience.
Was he a Bruce R. McConkie kind of Mormon?
I think so. We have Mormon doctrine on the shelf, and in my experience since then, people have told me that I take things too literally and have adopted a black and white view that's not appropriate. So I guess that label applies to me as well. I graduated from seminary, and before I was old enough to serve a mission, I kept on going to seminary because my dad was the teacher, so I guess I could do that because I loved it so much. I taught. I memorized all the scripture mastery scriptures.
Scripture Chase? Were you in Scripture Chase competitions?
I love that. I had a church teacher or leader challenge me at one point to memorize the Sermon on the Mount. Like, he was going to memorize it, I was going to memorize it, and we'd see who could do it or who could do it first. And I did it. I memorized the Sermon on the Mount, and then I thought, well, why stop there? And I actually, at one point, I can't do it now, but at one point I had Matthew chapter 1 through like 12 memorized. I could quote. I love the scriptures. I found in them certainty, all the answers for anything that I needed to find answers for in my life. A story that I thought of in thinking about what to share with my story here was I took an alternate route educationally. I went to junior college as a teenager, and I was one day waiting for a class to begin. It was a warm, sunny day in Southern California. There was an outdoor pavilion next to where my classroom was, and the window was open. There was a class still going on. And I was waiting for the class to start. And I could hear the teacher, it was a philosophy class, inside. He said something like, if God spoke to Moses and told us about the creation of the earth and all this stuff that we have in the scriptures, why doesn't God speak to man on earth today? And all the my Mormon spidey sense kicked off, and I knew that I was there in that place at that moment to answer his question. So I stuck my head into the window, and I testified, there is a prophet on the earth today, and his name is Gordon B. Hinckley, and God does speak to him. And the whole class turned around, and anyway, I withdrew. But that's just an example of how passionate I was about my testimony and about the church.
What was it like to grow up a Mormon in a California high school?
We're definitely in the minority, but there was, in my ward and in my stake, there were great kids. There were a lot of youth, and that's where I found a lot of my friends, and I loved it. Stake dances,
youth conferences, temple trips. That's where I found my friends and enjoyed it very much. Did you ever have any? Did you ever sort of have any moments of doubt as a teenager where you weren't sure the church was true? Or did you have those moments where you wanted to get your own testimony, Mormonized promise, so you'd read the Book of Mormon and pray to know it's true? Any of that?
So I definitely did have experiences where you attend a Sunday school lesson, talk about getting your own testimony, not relying on your parents' faith, Mormonized promise, and I did all of that. I did not, I didn't doubt.
You didn't even doubt.
I don't remember in my youth any periods of doubt. It was just knowing it better and more firmly. And so, yeah. So I did have spiritual experience where I had warm feelings about what I was asking, and I felt like I had answers to my prayers, and that I knew that it was true.
Did you have, there are a lot of Mormon teens who hear messages around sexuality and have a lot of guilt and shame, bishop's visits, or internalized kind of shame around matters of sexuality. Was any of that part of your experience?
Absolutely, yeah. The church culture and in my home was a very sex negative environment, and so as my sexuality developed, it was an extremely shameful and guilt-ridden part of my life. It was crippling at times, and I did my best to suppress any kind of sexual feeling and to repent. There were lots of tears and maybe even bordering on depression, that I couldn't fix this within myself, that the natural man was, to me, so apparent in me. Absolutely. I think the guilt was very strong in my life.
Did you have any moments where you were sort of falling away, or like being a rebellious kid, even though you believed? Did you have any moments of kind of rebellion?
I don't think so.
No,
I
you were
was
just
pretty
Peter
much,
Priesthood.
I was
Peter
that guy.
Priesthood.
Like sneaking out of the house to take cookies to people.
Oh, yeah.
Say that again?
Well, I wasn't a perfect child or anything, but I had some friends where I would sneak out of the house without asking for permission. So I was breaking the rules. But what we did was, for example, we would go and deliver cookies or something to people to go out and do good stuff, right?
That's awesome.
I was not a rebellious teenager.
How was your mission?
Good. I served in the Russia Rostov-na-Donu mission. When I was young, that wasn't an option, right? The Cold War was still on. Missionaries were not allowed into the country. And I remember teachers asking, "Oh, you want to go on a mission, right?" "Yes." "Where do you want to go?" And I always said Russia. And when I had submitted my papers, we put a map up on the wall, and anybody who came over to the house invited them to put a pin in it where they thought I was going. And I guessed Moscow.
Whoa.
Didn't get called to Moscow, but that was an additional, it felt good and confirming that I'm being blessed with the desires of my heart, right? I wanted to serve the Lord. I wanted to serve in Russia, and here I'm being called to Russia. So I served as hard as I could. 2 years, I gave it my best. I followed the rules. I didn't slack off. I didn't break the rules. I love the Russian people. Certainly there's hard times on the mission, as every missionary knows.
Do you get to be a DL or a ZL or an AP or any of that stuff?
Zone leader and mission secretary.
Oh, nice. Yeah. You were in the office.
I was.
Okay.
And answering the phone in Russian when you don't have the body language.
Right.
That was a challenge.
So did you finish your mission with the full intact testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then take us to the point just quickly where you met Sara.
So returned from my mission, and that was in 2000, summer of 2000, and then started at BYU that fall. And we were in the same ward together, so that's where we met. That would have been in September when the semester started, around then.
August, September, yeah.
And our first date was in October. And
Were you in Healing Halls? Were you in the dorms?
No, I lived in the Glenwood, and he lived with his sister in Pleasant Grove. So, I mean, initially you went to like a singles ward there, or just your sister's ward?
Yeah, it was not a super important detail, but
he just realized there were no young single girls, and so that's why he ended up in my ward kind of by chance, and yeah.
Okay, cool. So Sara, let's hear your story too. Let's hear your Mormon story.
Okay. Well, on my mom's side of the family, we've got pioneer stock way back. You know, you get those emails from Family Search that are like, your ancestor's birthday is today or whatever. I got an email saying that my ancestor was in the history of the church. And when I went to look at it, I think Sylvanus Hewlett or something like that, I guess his claim to fame is being chastened by or chastised by Joseph Smith. So
that's an honor.
That's an honor.
That's an honor.
That's my pioneer stock there. So that's my mom's side. And on my dad's side, he was a convert to the church. So I don't know if you want me to tell that story.
I mean, just whatever would give us a sense for your upbringing.
Yeah. So my dad, he was working, I think he was at Yellowstone. He worked at Yellowstone quite a bit. He's from Montana. And he was working, and there was a guy reading A Marvelous Work and a Wonder.
LeGrand Richards.
Yeah, and it was distracting him from his work, and apparently my dad was tasked with, go tell this guy to stop reading the book or take it from him or whatever. So my dad took the book from him and flipped through it and got interested and started reading it himself and found something special in it. And then a few months later, he picked up some hitchhikers who he knew. One of them he had known from the Congregational church that he was a member of growing up. And he said, hey, I recently became a Mormon. And so he said, well, send the missionaries to me. And he met the missionaries, and they played golf together, and he eventually got baptized. And so he ended up going to BYU. So I think he was 18 when he joined the church. So went to BYU and met my mom. And yeah, so he was a convert. Always loved the church. I would say our family was traditional in that we attended church every week. We had family scripture time. But I think my father was pretty nuanced. He read a lot of Hugh B. Brown. So, and he just read a lot. He was very well read. He would read books about Taoism. He would read about physics. He would read any topic. He was very just interested in learning. So yeah, traditional, but I would say nuanced and a lot more flexible than, for instance, Sam's family. When we married, I just noticed differences in how we saw things.
So did you already tell me what city you were raised in?
So I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
And then
what were you doing in Indiana? What were your parents doing in Indiana?
So my dad actually was a seminary teacher.
Like a CES?
Like for work. He did that in Utah. And then when we lived in Indiana, he worked with the Institute programs. And
so he's a CES employee?
Yes. Yep.
For how many years?
Forever.
Okay.
I mean, till he had to retire. He got cancer and had to retire. And he passed away in 2009.
Okay. So he was in Fort Wayne doing CES?
Doing Institute.
Okay.
Yep. And then we moved to Ammon, Idaho when I was 10. So.
And was he a seminary institute teacher
and
there?
then he was a principal of a high school seminary. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, the one that my children now attend. So we're kind of back where we started.
How big is Ammon, Idaho?
60,000. Or is that Idaho Falls? I don't know what Ammon is.
Ammon's just an appendage to Idaho Falls.
Okay.
I'm not sure how big it is.
So what was your upbringing like? Was it super Mormon?
Yeah, it was super Mormon.
How many siblings?
There's 7 of us.
Oh, my big families.
Well, there's 8 of us, but one child passed away.
Okay.
So I grew up with 7. Yeah, I mean, we did all the things Mormons do. My dad loved the scriptures, and so our scripture time was very much, we would all take turns reading, but he would then elaborate on the scriptures or teach us, because he was a seminary teacher. That's what he loved to do. So trying to think.
So like scripture study, family home evening, family prayer, all that stuff?
Yeah, I don't remember a ton of family home evening. When was that? That became a thing like in the 80s.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You're not that old.
So, yeah. But I think that I'm towards the youngest. And so maybe my parents were just kind of like...
busy.
Yeah.
Most people,
busy.
almost everybody is
Sure.
too busy.
And I think they had raised most of their kids were older, so
They were tired. By the time you came around,
That's what happens when you're a
they were
parent,
wiped out.
right?
Yeah.
You get tired. So yeah, I don't remember a ton of that, but yeah.
How was your testimony growing up?
My testimony was great. Yeah, I loved primary. I loved young women's.
Do you have a favorite primary song? I'd love to ask people that.
Yes, I don't know the title. It's I Like to Look for Rainbows.
Yeah.
That one, just beautiful. When I Am Baptized, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. So yeah, I loved primary, loved young women's. I loved girls' camp. That was like
Your jam?
that was my jam. Totally, just ate everything up at girls' camp. And I was very much, I guess, a leader insofar that I tried to take people under my wing, tried to like be inclusive with all the young women, and just was always trying to look out for people who might not feel like they fit in. And so that was important to me.
Did you have dreams or goals as a Mormon teen girl?
I never wanted to be a mom. Like I didn't think of it. I guess I wasn't that forward thinking. I didn't really have dreams and goals. I was just like, I'm kind of a take it a day at a time kind of person, I guess. I don't know. So I didn't really think too far ahead. But when I did apply for college, I only applied to BYU. Like I just knew that's where I wanted
Provo?
to go.
What about
and I mean, they're like a joint application.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I did
The BYUs.
Yes.
the BYUs, right?
Okay.
So, and I would say that as a teenager, I was probably a little more orthodox than my parents. Like
Whoa.
I would take,
But your dad was CES. How does that
right.
work?
But like I said, he was pretty, and
Was he kind of liberal?
a little bit. Yeah. And he would, you're like, yeah. And
Compared to me, anyway.
yeah.
You probably okay. I want to hear this. So like, how were you feeling like your parents were not quite as into it as you?
I guess what I mean is that I would take things seriously that I was taught in seminary or Sunday school. And when I was strict with myself, it wasn't because my parents taught me that way, I guess is what I mean.
Yeah.
It's that it came from me. For instance, like I went to a movie with friends. We went and saw the Titanic when it was big. And
That's edgy.
yeah, and there was this nudity scene.
Yeah.
I immediately felt, this darkness and I should leave. And I thought it was the spirit telling me to leave. So I left and called my mom to come get me. And things started getting shaky with those friends after that. I think they thought I was a prude, and I was. And so I guess things like that, where I was very like to the letter. I'm not going to view that kind of stuff. I'm not going to, and I don't know if they wanted to skip church while traveling or something. It bothered me. I would think, well, we're not supposed to do that, and things like that.
You were their little Nephi.
Probably annoying. Yeah. I'm sure I was annoying. So
Were you both Nephis? Were you a Nephi too?
I don't think I ever had to write my parents. They were believers, so
Yeah.
I was following their lead, their good lead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do remember having a few moments of doubt. I had two of my best friends at the end of high school were not LDS. One was Catholic and one was just non-denominational Christian. Amazing girls, like just wise beyond their years, really compassionate, kind people. And they didn't have the gospel, and they didn't seem to need it. They seemed fine without it.
That's
And that,
dangerous.
yeah, that
That's
caused
super dangerous.
that caused a lot of cognitive dissonance for sure. And I remember thinking about it a lot and thinking, what does Mormonism have that makes it necessary? If my friends can be really good without it, and even better than me, I felt like, they live their values even better than I do. What's so special about Mormonism? And I thought about that for months, and I think that I eventually kind of resolved it in my head with thinking about like patriarchal blessing, the priesthood. You know, there's some things that are unique about Mormonism that I thought, well, I feel like my patriarchal blessing is really special to me and meaningful. So it must be true. You know, the whole thing must be true. And that kind of helped resolve it at that point.
There's always the light of Christ and the gift of the Holy Ghost
thing,
right?
Well, and there's
your friends
quotes,
can have the light of Christ,
right,
but not the gift of the Holy Ghost.
And there's quotes from Hinckley, like, everyone has good, we invite all good, you know, and so I'm sure there was some of that too.
So there was a place for good people in the world who weren't Mormon.
Yeah.
You just had to work hard to get there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, any other issues with your childhood before you kind of go to BYU? Anything else you want to share about your upbringing, your background?
I guess something else I did want to bring up is the whole missionary work thing. It was hard for me. And I always thought it was because I was shy or I wasn't converted enough or I didn't love the gospel enough to want to share it. But like I mentioned with these two friends that were in LDS, I always, you know, there'd be a talk in church about missionary work and I'd feel that, and just guilt in my gut. I should be telling these friends about the gospel, but I never wanted to. It just didn't sit right with who I am. But again, I thought it was my problem. I thought it was me not being righteous enough. So I think I eventually did give them a Book of Mormon, but I hated the entire experience. It was just looking back now, I can see how wrong it felt. I didn't feel right doing it, but I felt like I was supposed to. If that makes sense. I think that'll kind of be important later.
Okay.
In the story. So.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Anything else about your story, Sam, before we talk about your marriage, about your upbringing, any important aspects of your upbringing? You got the main things?
Well, I don't know if this is relevant for later, but I think like any buddy's childhood experience, there were some things about growing up that were unpleasant in my home, particularly maybe in a McConkie Mormon home where there was a very well-developed sense of right and wrong, and being wrong or sinning or breaking the rules brought strict and severe punishment. And so I resented that, and simultaneously perhaps that influenced my worldview, that black and white, like there's no gray. Things are right or they're wrong, and never the twain shall meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see where this is going to come in. Yeah, okay.
Well, and you had talked about like the church, you know, those happy commercials in the 80s and 90s, like giving you hope that someday you could have a happy family in the gospel.
That was something that I liked about the church. It was all about having a happy family, and I looked forward to having my own happy family.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys meet each other. Anything you want to say about your dating or courtship, or?
It was awesome.
It was awesome. It was a lot of fun.
I think in standard LDS, go on a mission, get married, have kids style, we followed the plan. We met at the beginning of the semester. We had our first date at the end of October, and we were engaged in March of the next year.
Well, that's slow.
And then married. And then married in August.
Yeah, so you guys were slackers. So you're basically slackers. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Sort of.
So less than a year from first eyesight to married.
Yeah. And that was my first semester at BYU.
Oh,
so I
you were a freshman.
I was 19 when we...
I couldn't let that go around.
Yeah, I was 19 when we got married, so it's really young.
Right. We got married young, quickly.
And I didn't plan on getting married at all. I think because it was the norm, and I very much didn't want to be the norm. My mom actually got me a bracelet that said anti-commitment or something like that, like as a joke. Like I was like, I'm not going to get married. But
not ever, but not in any
not in
kind
the
of
first
rush.
year,
Yeah.
like those silly girls that go to BYU. But that's what I ended up being.
But by the end of your freshman year, you were married.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what was your understanding as a couple as to what role the church would play in your marriage and in your family?
You want to start?
I feel like we've been talking a lot.
okay.
Go for it.
Our entire lives were centered around it and built on it. Every decision was informed by it. I don't think so. Sara wasn't planning on getting married right away. She also wasn't planning on having children right away. And I didn't force that, but I certainly influenced it, and we started having children right away because the prophets taught that there are spirits waiting for physical bodies to come, and it's not our place. Like it's a sin to deny them that opportunity. That's where I was at that time. And so we were both college students and starting our family in poverty, adding immense stress to our lives, voluntarily unhealthy stress, I think.
By having kids in college. Yeah.
But the church was everything. That was going to, like, we're holding hands together and holding the iron rod, and that's going to be guiding our lives. That's the commitment that we had.
Yeah, and I think the children thing was like our first clash, or the first moment where I realized he has more of a strict idea of what it means to be a Mormon, I guess, because I wasn't planning on having children right away. But then he would read me these quotes about you're not supposed to put off having children, even for schooling. And I was like, wow, I can't argue with the church. Like, I want to do what's right. I want to follow the church. And so we did start our family. And yeah, he didn't force me, but there was definitely influence with the backing of the church.
Yeah. And when God's the one telling you to do something, that's hard to.
So you're pregnant how many months into your marriage?
Second month.
What?
Probably because we got married in August. Olivia was born in June. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty immediate.
Okay. All right. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And we love parenthood. We love our children.
Yep. Absolutely.
But that decision was not made independent of the influence of the church.
So how many kids do you have?
5.
5 kids. What was your understanding about kind of patriarchy and decision making and, power in the relationship? And was that at all a struggle or an issue early on or ever?
Yes.
You want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think that, what I just described became a pattern, right? Of us maybe disagreeing on something, but he would always have the church on his side. And so it wasn't that I felt like I had to give in because he was a man, but it was that all the white men in the church were agreeing with him. And so he was always right when it came to those decisions, the times when my desire or opinion disagreed with the church. So yeah, I think that was a running theme in our marriage for sure. I know that up until recently, I had a lot of internalized sexism, and I thought it was just the way it was supposed to be, and that it was right.
And as you progressed in the marriage, did that weigh on you? Did you just come to accept it and feel okay about it? Was it an ongoing burden or a problem? Did you have depression over that sort of stuff?
No, Sam's like awesome from the beginning. It's very much been a partnership. Like, we had children in college, and it was very much trading off. He was very supportive of me finishing my degree. Like, a lot of things were great, but it was just every once in a while making a decision when I felt like I had to give in because he had the church on his side. So it didn't really weigh heavy. I will say the temple weighed heavy. The temple covenants that
when
I
you
had
went through
made.
the temple, do you want to
Yep.
talk about what that was like for you?
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. So the first time I went through, we were getting married the next day. So that was kind of lost in the marriage, right? And so I don't remember if the first time that bothered me. But I know from the beginning it bothered me, when the covenant was to hearken to my husband, but he got to hearken to God. I didn't understand.
So that you noticed that?
I noticed. Oh, absolutely. I noticed it. And I think I've always been pretty independent. I don't know. I never would have called myself a feminist, but I had like 5 brothers growing up. I could beat the boys in races when I was a kid. Like I thought girls can do just as good as boys in anything. You know, that was kind of always how I felt. And so I was like, what? I have to hearken to him? And he's a great guy, but he's not. I have a relationship with God. Why don't I get to just hearken to him? I have that personal relationship. It didn't make any sense to me, but I thought, we're told just keep going. We'll understand it someday. So I very much put it aside and thought, I'll just keep going back to the temple. And every time I would just puzzle it out and try to figure out how this could make sense, but it never did. We're taught Adam's not punished, but it felt like Eve was punished for being the first one to partake. And I didn't understand that. So that always bothered me. And I remember once I brought it up to Sam, I said, I don't like this part.
I remember that.
Yeah. And he actually started crying. You want to tell your side of that story?
Well, just in general leading up to that, so I had been taught the father presides not as a dictator, but when it comes down to it,
As a dictator.
when it comes down to if there's any disagreement, that's kind of what I had expected. You want to be kind and loving and serving and everything, but I think the church's teachings did negatively impact my worldview of what a healthy relationship looked like. And I had been going to the temple as a missionary right before we got married. And I think part of me looked forward to having a wife that would covenant, like that's the beginning of our godhood together, right? And then when she told me she didn't like that, apart from it personally hurting, like you don't want to hearken to me, like there's something flawed about me. It was also my wife's not a believer fully. She's not fully devoted to the church. And so that was troubling.
Yeah. And I tend to be bluntly honest sometimes. And so I don't know that I was able to express my internal turmoil. I just said, I don't want to hearken to you, which, that's tactful. So I can see why maybe his feelings were hurt. But yeah. So basically I share that, feeling that I've had for a while, and he starts crying. I'm never going to bring up anything like that again. Right.
Problem solved.
So yeah, that kind of shut me down in that way. Like, don't bring up things that I don't agree with
Yeah. Okay. So what do you want to tell us about kind of your, marriage / career leading up into the point where you guys one of you started having doubts? I know that you eventually became bishop. So just talk us through kind of anything you want to leading up to the point where someone starts having doubts or you must have been living the Mormon dream in appearances, because being chosen as a bishop is kind of on level one, the epitome of the young Mormon experience. And I'm assuming you were a bishop pretty young. Yeah. So talk about the ascent to high status in the church.
So I was all in. I was very dedicated. And I returned from my mission, 21, we get married. At 23, I'm ordained a high priest and put into a high priest group leadership. So right off the bat, I'm being tapped.
That's young. Yeah.
Pretty young. And I gave it everything I had. Sara, you maybe want to tell it. She was called to be young women's president when we've got a baby in our family where she had leadership positions right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And the ascent. So we finished our we finished our degrees. I was studying computer science and graduated. And maybe this will be relevant later. I actually was admitted to BYU as a linguistics major, and I've always had a passion for language. And
that was before your mission.
That was actually, I was admitted before my mission as a linguistics major. When I actually started, I changed to computer science. I graduated with my bachelor's. She wasn't done with her bachelor's yet. I started a master's. We both finished
in computer science.
Computer
science at BYU.
At BYU program.
Okay.
Yep.
And then got a job at Microsoft.
What year? Wait, what year did you leave BYU?
2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
We moved.
And just because I like to think about timelines, 2004 is when I left Microsoft. And 2005 is when I moved, started Mormon Stories.
Oh.
So you're going to Microsoft at about the time I left Microsoft and started Mormon Stories. So I'm curious, as you're telling the story, I just want to hear if any of the stuff we started doing with blogs and with podcasts, eventually the CES letter and other things, I want to hear when or if, because some people live so much in the Mormon bubble, they just don't know about any of this stuff for forever.
That was me.
Okay. So you...
I took that bubble with me everywhere I went.
So you moved to Seattle? What part? That's a big deal to get at Microsoft, right? Although
it was great.
Yeah.
Life was...
What group did you join?
Right.
What group?
I was part of a team that did the photo apps, Movie Maker, when that was a thing.
A blogging thing for a while.
Windows Live Writer. So
fun. Okay, so where'd you live in?
Sultan, which is a little town on.
Do you know where
highway.
Monroe is?
Snohomish County.
Yeah. Okay.
On your way to.
It's really gorgeous up there. Great people. Yeah. I love the people of Sultan.
A lot of Mormons were there. A lot of Microsoft employees.
I feel like for the population, relatively speaking, there were a lot. The ward was pretty small.
Our ward was like Gold Bar, Sultan. It was a massive geographic, massive, like 40-minute drive geographic.
There were quite a few in our immediate neighborhood.
Yeah, there were actually. Yeah. There were like 6 families probably.
Okay. And so, Microsoft is an extremely demanding company.
Yes.
Tons of hours, tons of commitment. The commuting is awful, so the traffic is terrible. So it's not it's a non-trivial thing to be a Mormon young family trying to succeed at Microsoft.
I'm glad you said that. I very much felt that way. So I had been taught my whole life that the church comes first, above everything, and I tried to live that. And so I felt at a disadvantage at Microsoft.
Yeah.
The commute was terrible. I was called to be an early morning seminary teacher.
So was I.
Yeah. And we were still having babies that interrupted my sleep. I really think that I suffered brain damage from the sleep deprivation. Yeah. I think it affected my ability to hold my train of thought and to think cognitively, which does not help when you're working at Microsoft, right? And so that added a lot of stress. I did not enjoy working at Microsoft overall. There were good parts about it, but overall, I did not enjoy my experience.
And they had this, for anyone who cares about history, they had this review process where you get a 3 or 3.5 or a 4. But the managers had to stack rank anyone who worked for them. And if you fell in that bottom quartile with the 3s, you'd get no stock options, no bonuses, no raises. At least it was that way when I was there. So you were in a team environment, but at the same time, the stars got heavily rewarded and the slackers, or the people that were perceived or were not as political to be perceived as performing, got nothing. And so it was kind of like you have to work in teams, but it's total dog eat dog. And it was just a really cutthroat culture that made it even more stressful.
Couldn't have said it better. That's what I observed as well.
Yeah.
And it was really stressful for me at home because he had early morning seminary, and then he would just come home to change and then drive that hour to work because we were about an hour from Redmond, and then they expect a lot, and so maybe 10-hour days and then another hour home, and I had young children, and if there ever was any depression for me or just resentment for and then the church is going to take more time, and I never see my husband, and that it would have been during that time for sure.
Margie had depression too.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fights. It was really hard.
Yeah.
Yep. And so actually that's coming. Yeah, that's coming. So
Good.
So I felt like I was guided by the Spirit in my decisions, and the upward trajectory of my life confirmed all of that. I'm prospering. I'm doing the right thing. I felt like I should run for office, local office. I ran for city council and was elected.
Oh, on top of all this.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he was a high counselor at that time too, driving 40 minutes to the stake center for meetings.
Of
In our
Stake High
state.
Council.
Yeah,
Stake High
High
Council.
Yeah.
What the?
It was not healthy.
That's when I really got angry.
Yeah. So talking about like,
That makes no sense. Literally no sense.
well,
He's an overachiever.
God works in mysterious ways. I felt like I was called to do it. And I think that what had been modeled for me was a good, strong, valiant Mormon man goes out and gets things done.
Yeah.
And his wife enables that, allows that to happen.
Yeah.
And
Oh, Olivia's crazy.
Okay, wait, Olivia. What's your reaction? I want to hear it.
It's just funny hearing these things because it's like, well, it's not just problems with the Mormon Church; it's also problems with society. And I'll talk about my story later. But
But your reaction is what? Was you hear your parents talk
that's
about
so
this?
stupid.
What? What's stupid?
This idea that your wife should enable you to go and achieve things because you're supposed to be this macho man.
Yeah. You're not loving that.
Not loving it.
Do you have anything to add, Sam Jr.? As you hear your parents talk about all this?
There's many things to think about, certainly. I actually didn't know the entirety of the story, I guess. If anything, my reaction is definitely changing, or not changing, but building my perception of what future partnerships I'll have are going to be like. This is definitely informing my future, to put it mildly.
Okay. All right. Fun. Well, your kids are hearing some of this for the first time.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay, so you're running for office on top of everything.
Yeah. So life was out of control.
And you're depressed, possibly, or at least some signs of depression.
Yeah. I don't think I felt like it at the time, but and I homeschooled the kids for a good chunk of time.
Gosh.
We're both overachievers. But I think that actually saved me, because if I had just been home without like a purpose and a calling and meaning, something I can do every day to have meaning in my life, I think I would have wanted to get a job. I think I would have been struggling even more. So I loved homeschooling the kids, and I think that gave me purpose, but it also burns you out. It's pretty intense to be with your kids day in and day out, and to be in charge of their curriculum and their learning, and then not have your husband be around. So
Yeah. If I may interject, something that I have actually been thinking of recently is, I think probably in part because you, Mom, were, homeschooling us, and I'm sure even as a child you can sense some tension between parents sometimes,
Sure.
right? I developed a very strong parental feeling of gratitude, or a feeling of gratitude towards you guys as my parents, and I think that actually might have helped. Obviously, we'll get to this later, I guess, but it did shape me into, I think, a miniature copy of what you described as your childhood in slightly different ways. So
That's important. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Sam Jr. Okay, so
as I said, I wasn't happy at Microsoft, and I quit.
how many years?
5 years.
Little over 5 years.
When you vested, did you get stock options?
I
at
got
first?
some stuff, yeah.
5 years is your vesting.
Gave a bunch to, but it was, it felt like the right thing to do, and it felt like God was
leading
me yet again.
Yeah.
And it was shortly after that I was called to the High Council. So I took that as also a continued confirmation I'm on the right path.
Yes.
And I quit Microsoft to start my own translation business. So
nice.
now I translate from Russian to English, which was really a leap of faith. I think I
So you stopped as a software developer
stopped
altogether?
software development.
Whoa,
yeah,
that's a
I
big
guess I just had
change.
such a bad taste in my mouth. I was ready for big change, and I have always loved language, so I thought give that a try. And anyway, that starting any business is extremely stressful.
Yeah.
Most businesses
Yeah.
fail,
Yeah.
and so you take that with the church responsibilities and the city council, and we were stretched. The weight was too much, and we started having marriage problems like never before. There'd been disagreements about this or that, but it was real marriage problems now.
So how many years into the marriage was that?
About 10.
10 years in.
Kind of
Okay.
typical, I think, actually.
Sure. So
A
just
decade
fighting.
Well, I think different expectations.
Yeah.
As I said, I felt like God was telling me to be on the city council and to do all of these things. And Sarah wasn't happy with that arrangement. She wanted more time, more support.
Yeah, for sure. And when he started the business, he would go down to an office that we'd prepared for him and be down there 10 or 12 hours. I think you feel prompted to do something that God tells you to do, but then you got to put in 110, right? Like there's that idea that, but I have to put in the work to make God's promises come true to fruition. And so he would be down there for 10 or 12 hours but we weren't making any money yet. He would be studying for the translator certification, or he would be trying to build up clients. And so, yeah, it felt like better because he was home, but worse because he was home and I still didn't see him as much. Yeah.
Serious financial stress. I actually pulled out half of my
expensive there.
401k.
Holy.
I pulled out half of my 401k in order to have some liquid funds to see us through the transition. And every month, the balance of our account was getting lower and lower. So extreme stress on both of us and young children. Like, it was the perfect storm.
And I think we were both very much in our own head of our own stress. I wasn't getting support with raising the kids. He was extremely stressed trying to start this business, and I wasn't very understanding of that. So
I still, in this time, I believe the church was true, but I think just the emotional exhaustion, the weight of it all I was feeling worn out. I was not as zealous about what I had been zealous about before. I still did everything I was supposed to do, but I was less excited about it. I felt like I'm sacrificing to go home teaching. My wife resents the fact that I'm already gone all the time, and then the church, I don't think she resented the church for it, but that's how I received, like, you're not supporting me in doing my home teaching. And so I felt this conflict between what I wanted to do, which was all out, I'm in the church 100%, and it's not working for me. It's harming my relationship. It's harming my family. That was the first time I think I began to have any kind of feeling like that.
Yeah, and I remember a talk in church in that ward where the leader said, the men, they want to go and be the hero. Like, women, let your husband be the hero. Like, let him go do his home teaching. Let him go to his meetings and be the hero. And so that message was being reinforced to me. I need to be a better wife. I need to be more supportive. I need to not resent this. I need to, give my life like we're taught in the church.
So it seems like you're kind of packing it down. Like you're just sort
absolutely.
of like, it seems like year after year of like,
Yep.
I'm not getting what I want. I'm not having a voice, but the church continually keeps coming in and saying, pack it down and support your husband and kind of be quiet and do your job.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. And I'm still processing through it to some degree, finding that my voice matters, my emotions are valid, that kind of thing. It's definitely been a process for me. So.
Okay. So how does this...
So it eventually got better. I think the financial stress was a huge part of it, and I eventually built the business up and we started making money. And when there wasn't like that financial gun to the head, it allowed our relationship to begin healing, I think.
Yeah, well, that, and I remember one night I went to take dinner to a family, which looking back, I'm like, dude, girl, you didn't need to do that when you were struggling so much to be doing that. But anyway, I was taking dinner to a family and I just broke down sobbing in the car. I didn't want to go home. I think it was probably the first time in my life I didn't want to be at my house. And I was just praying and I said, Heavenly Father, you have to do something. You have to send somebody to me because I can't. It was the first time I'd thought about divorce, and that was just not an option with how I was raised and being in the church. And so I was like, you got to send somebody to me. And I had this warm feeling come over me, and just was told, go home. It's going to be okay. And I went home, and then like not 10 minutes later, there was a knock on our door, and it was somebody from our ward who is like, he's a little rough around the edges kind of guy, very like missionary obsessed, zealous. And he's the one who showed up. And I was like, seriously, like, Heavenly Father, this is who you sent to me, this guy. But he came in and he actually like was talking about marriage, and he shared a few things that, I don't know, they just gave me enough hope to keep going. And that to me was a turning point of, I'm just going to stick it out and we'll keep trying. And yeah.
Things got better. It took a couple of years. So in 2013, we moved to Washington to work for Microsoft. I wasn't working for Microsoft anymore, and so
it's expensive to live there.
Right.
Expensive, and
it's gray skies.
Rains all the time.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that anymore. So we considered moving. We started planning for that, and Sarah's got family here in Idaho Falls, or not here, but in Idaho Falls, and so that's where we ended up.
You moved.
So we moved.
Okay.
Sold the house and moved. And so now we're summer 2013, and that episode there in Washington was a very dark period, a low point in my life. That upward Mormon trajectory had stalled out and then reversed. This was not part of my plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. As I said, some of that zeal was gone, and but when we moved, I wanted to take that as reset. I'm gonna do my best to recommit to everything, and I did. In our new ward, I went out of my way to introduce myself and to be my best church member self. And
this is kind of homeboy and homegirl returns home, right? You're returning to Ammon, right?
Well, I am.
Okay, you're returning to Ammon.
Yes.
So you're going back to where you were from.
Southern California.
You were still Southern California.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so you're returning to her home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Triumphantly.
Triumphant.
I don't know if triumphant.
With our tail
kicking
between
and
our
screaming,
legs.
maybe. I actually didn't ever plan to move back to my hometown. But
We felt we were being guided, right?
well, and
We
my
made
mom,
it a matter of
my
prayer.
mom at the time was taking care of her parents, and she had already taken care of my dad until he passed, and then her parents moved in with her, and it just felt right to be there, be
Supportive.
close. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's cheaper.
Yes.
too. Well,
Cheaper in Seattle.
Yes.
That is true. The housing market, we lost a lot of money selling the house.
Because it was
There.
during.
We bought high, we sold low.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
cheaper, but we lost a lot of money. My net worth is much lower now than it would be if we had
Stayed.
even
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
longer or kept
Yeah.
whatever. But so I got called to be Young Men's president very shortly after moving in, and then 3 months later, we get a call to come meet with the stake president. I had just received a calling. I thought, surely this is a calling for Sara. We go in to meet with him, and he asks me to be the bishop of the Ammon 26 ward. It was like an out-of-body, like tunnel vision, and then I'm watching this happen from the outside.
Yeah, you were shocked.
Totally not expecting that.
He like cackled. Like he laughed kind of maniacally, and I was like,
"Is this a joke? Like, are you serious?" Growing up, I thought and was taught, you're the future leaders of the church.
Saturday's warrior.
Yes, you are going to bear up the kingdom triumphantly, and you shouldn't want a calling, but you are going to do that. And so I tried to have that ambitious, humble ambition as much as possible. And I think when I was a teenager, there was a part of me that wanted to be bishop, or at least thought it would be cool.
Yeah, like every other Mormon boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the moment when the call came, that was the last.
Really?
That I did not want to be bishop. No. And in fact, like I told you, I started to lose my zeal. I just wasn't as excited as my peak Mormon self. But my sense of duty, all of that conditioning kicked in, and I, sir, I accepted the call, and I recommitted. I gave it everything I had, and so bishop service began.
And Olivia, that can a wife can maybe experience that two different ways or multiple ways, but one would be like, oh, this is validation that we're on the right track and that we're doing Mormonism right, and the Lord wouldn't call my husband to such a special calling if we weren't all doing good things. Or it can cause a lot of stress and sadness, like, we don't have time for this. It's young kids, the marriage isn't great. Like, how is it for you?
I think there was some of both. We purchased an acre, and we were looking forward to getting chickens and having a garden. And it's a lot of work to take care of an acre. And it was a wilderness when we bought it. So it was going to be a lot of work and money. And so I was a little like, oh, well, there go those plans. Any extra time we might spend on that is going to be as him as a bishop now. But generally, I was excited for him. We were in a good place in our marriage at that point, and I could sense that he was losing his zeal. And so I remember thinking this is going to be a great opportunity of growth for him. It's going to be really good for him. And I kind of committed to, I'm not going to be resentful. I'm going to support him 100%. I'm not going to complain. And I think I was actually in a healthy enough place where I could do that. And I think I did do that while you were bishop.
Absolutely.
I didn't resent it like I did previously. And maybe it was because the kids were getting older and things were a little easier too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
She was fantastically supportive.
Okay. And so you did the bishop thing. Let me just check in with the kids really quick. So kids, a move from Washington to Idaho is a big switch, and then having your dad called as bishop. Anything you guys want to share about either of those things?
Yeah.
Or were you too young to notice?
Oh, no. Well, I was 11, I think. Yeah, I turned 11 right after we moved to Idaho. And just in terms of the church and, being 11, 12, that's when you start to have all this pressure put on you to, like, get a testimony. And you start to feel like you need to fit in with the youth around you. And I think our ward in Washington, it was a lot of converts, and it was a lot of people with very diverse experiences and ideas. And when I moved here, I definitely felt a shift in how the church felt. It was just a different culture. It felt more homogenous, more closed-minded. And so I think that definitely affected me. I started to feel a pressure to fit in and to it started to be that my community was solely centered around the church, because all my friends were part of the church, and so that definitely. And
you liked that or didn't like that? Or both mixed?
It was okay for a little bit, but I really started to struggle because my story is really interesting because unlike my parents who didn't really have any doubts, I started to ask questions when I was probably 12. when I was Indian Women's, and I would have these lessons about the temple or about these things, and I had so many questions. And I also had access to the internet a little bit more than my parents did, I think. And so I found things out about the church that I was like, what? And
Like what?
some of it was historical stuff, like just about Joseph Smith marrying young girls, that I was like, as a kid, you don't really know how to conceptualize that, but a voice in my head is like, what? Like, we're never taught about stuff like this.
So you're having these thoughts as a 12-year-old?
Yeah, I'd say I started to feel uncomfortable with some things when I was 12, but it wasn't until I was probably 13, 14 that I really found out more. But yeah, when I was 12, I think it was more just this sense of I didn't like church. I stopped liking church, and when I was 13, I started to get really depressed because I had a lot of, I think I was a little bit like Sam in that I felt like I had to be perfect, and I felt like I was never living up to these standards all around me, and I felt like I couldn't ask questions I had. And so that started very, very early on, and I think moving to Idaho definitely affected that.
Okay. Sam, you want to jump in too?
Totally. Well, like every good, faithful Mormon boy, I was in awe of my dad, first of all, just as a son, I think, but definitely once he was made bishop. I think that there was definitely, that was definitely when my religious development started, sort of around 11 and 12 again, especially with the influence of Dad being bishop. In particular, I think there was that culture shift that Olivia mentioned with, it going from converts mostly and kind of transitioning into homogenized sort of Mormonism. There was most decidedly for me personally, there was a huge shift in the I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but there was a much lower level of zealousness and excitement and, commitment, not just throughout the ward itself, but especially throughout my peer groups, right? And so when you're 12 and you're like, you're going to get the laying on of hands, or, you'll be given the priesthood, you're basically given the power of God in some small way, like, holy crap, that blew my mind. And so, I would be all in, like Dad and Mom, and then I would look around me and I'd see the other guys and girls my age, but especially the guys, who just didn't really care, who were like, they believed it and they were converted to it, but at the end of the day, they weren't the ones doing fast offerings or doing all the different things that came with being a young man or having the priesthood. And so right off the bat, starting around, when I first got the Aaronic priesthood, I think that there was sort of that divergence that continued where I, as a dedicated, the bishop's son, right, the person in that sort of unique situation, found myself being more and more involved and passionate about the church, while everyone around me, in the ward, especially my peers, really just, it became more clear how much less committed they were than me. And, at the time, it's sort of the humble ambition that you brought up, like, okay, we have to be sanctimoniously humble about our own situation. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, like, people are telling me I could be the bishop someday. And, there is that part of your brain that's like, I want to serve the Lord. I also want to be the best person I can be. So that was absolutely a part of it.
So Sam Jr., if I'm understanding, I can kind of relate to this. I remember growing up in Texas as a Mormon, but moving to Utah thinking that, the Utah Mormons were going to be doing Mormonism the best way. But what I found was a lot of people, because a lot of Utah Mormons or Idaho Mormons, because they were growing up in it, it was just like the water they were swimming in, and they didn't take it as seriously. They weren't quite as devout. And, there might have even been kids partying just secretly and privately, just not taking it all super seriously. Is that kind of how you found it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, again, I had any particular expectations in place to be disappointed. But one thing that certainly played into that was, again, when I had just turned 12, and I think I talked to both of you guys about this, there were quite a few things happening, including Scrupulosity, which I'm sure we'll get to. But it was basically me as a 12-year-old who was barely or newly ordained deacon, and a bunch of 15, 16-year-olds. And what I quickly realized was that young men's was more about playing basketball, right, or church ball when that was a thing, than actually caring at all about the church, really, within that ward at least. And in particular, I definitely wasn't athletic as a 12-year-old. I like to think that's changed somewhat. Well, that's up for debate, I guess. But one thing that I definitely felt like was not only was it like no other young men really care about the church, at least not in the same way I do, it was also kind of exclusionary because they were all super into basketball and good at it overall. And there was 12-year-old Sam tripping over his own feet, probably with a Book of Mormon in his hand. So there were definitely many factors involved, but sort of my general feeling around 12 was definitely, I, for whatever reason, am the only one who cares about this. And
the church, meaning the church.
The church, meaning, the church and particularly all the activities and responsibilities that come with, like, the priesthood, right? And, I mean, just think about, like, what that means. Or to me, it meant, holy crap, I've been given a small piece of the power of God. Because I truly believed it, right? I believed that this is the pathway to eternal happiness, all these things. Like, this is it. Like, this is the way to live your life. Very simple, makes sense. You guys raised me well.
Like father, like son. Like grandfather, like father, like son.
Right, exactly. And so, I could not understand why you would have apathy towards the one true religion, God's true church. And another thing that was hugely important at this time for me was I started under the tutelage, I suppose, of both of you, Dad in particular, to explore ideas, philosophy, and politics and other things. And while I don't think I was some expert on religion, obviously, I definitely started to interact with ideas that, while they didn't cause me to doubt anything, allowed ideas to exist in my mind that I think would end up facilitating leaving the church and seeing the problems and the limitations with what was included in that.
Okay. All right. Well, that's super. I love getting the kids' point of view along with the parents. And so I also think it's interesting that Olivia is sort of questioning and not feeling great about things while Sam Jr. is feeling extra hyper-religious. That's an interesting dynamic between the siblings too. So.
Yeah, well, to be fair, like, there was definitely a point of time, right after moving to Idaho, where I think I was very much like, I found purpose in being super strict to all the rules and having a testimony and stuff. But I think it was maybe because I started to feel like just a failure all the time and like I didn't fit in, that I started to and then I stumbled, across things on the internet, and I started to just be like, hold on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, well, and you use the word hyper-religious, and I think that's the perfect way to describe it. I mean, I was Deacon's Quorum President, and then I was Teacher's Quorum President, and I am sure I would have been, Priest Quorum President or on through the levels, right? Because of my sort of, I'm the only guy who's, really all in the ward. And so as Deacon's Quorum President, because I bought into it, I was taught, the deacons of the ward that came in after me gradually, I am the steward and the caretaker, and there's all these crucial responsibilities, and scriptures tell us what deacons' responsibilities are, and so I would spend hours, legitimately, as a 12 and 13-year-old kid, I would spend hours praying and reading scriptures and pleading to the God I had been told about to let me feel love for the deacons and all these things. And as you can imagine, feeling like an overwhelming sense of love as a 12 or 13-year-old for kids that you really don't know that well, which was brought about by hours of intense attempts to feel that or have that experience. That was hugely impactful in terms of my perceptions of the reality of personal revelation and all these things, and only increased how zealous I was about the gospel and my callings within it. especially, I remember, I won't mention any names, but there was a deacon at the time. He's not part of the ward anymore, but when I was Deacon's Quorum president, he moved in, and his family struggled with the church. They were pretty inactive. And I just remember praying at night at some point about like how I could reach out to this kid, right? And I had one of the most powerful spiritual experiences, definitely, that I had had up until that point, right? Where I really did feel in a completely undeniable way like this great love, like this totally unconditional love for this kid. And I think that, all in all, that was a great thing, and that totally inspired me. It was also true that I spent hours and hours of my life trying to, create those feelings and to encourage them.
Love it. Okay, so you guys...
Can I just add something?
Yeah, please.
Just thinking about the kids' perspective moving to Idaho, I think I mentioned earlier I wasn't super thrilled about coming back to Idaho, and it was for that reason, because I spent my childhood in Indiana, I guess what you would call the mission field, and when we moved to Idaho, even as a 10-year-old, I sensed that difference of, I guess, when you're in the minority, like in Indiana, the youth kind of have to be the examples and stand out, and the ward family becomes very much a family. And when I moved to Idaho, I remember feeling like, a lot of kids my age don't care, or it doesn't feel as cohesive of a ward because everyone has their family, or everyone has, or they're just not that into the church or whatever it might have been. I guess I'm feeling a little sad hearing them say that, because I experienced those same emotions, and was kind of why I was not thrilled about coming back to Idaho. And Idaho is great. I hope we're not like dissing on it, and good people.
I was born in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
My mom was born and raised in Idaho, so
oh yeah,
I have a lot of Idaho love.
Yeah, it is a great place. I hope we're not being too down on it.
Sure.
But
I bet it's fun for you guys to hear your kids also tell their perspectives. Yeah. So